you're frustrated, you got two kids that are screaming in your ear and you don't like the way your salad's made. Okay.
Hello, Terry. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, Marty, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
So am I. So am I. And for anybody listening to us today, and for anybody that is not yet familiar with who you are and what you do, can you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. So I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, one of the bigger cities here in the United States. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from looking at me or from my voice, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I was actually the first person in my family to graduate from college. I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. The good news was I found a job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. The bad news was I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out in marketing at Wendy's. Then I became a hospital administrator. And then I made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did in my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator. After law enforcement, I started a school security consulting business, coached girls' high school basketball, became an author in 2020. But for the last 11 and a half years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's in the military here in the United States.
Very impressive background with, like you said yourself, a lot of different shifts and pivots. And I suppose that would have taken a lot of mindset changes for you as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that you faced with all of these pivots?
Sure. So there is sort of a backstory, because if you kind of look at my resume, it sort of looks like a Super Ball went off in the room. I mean, it's just all over the place. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if you understand the backstory, and I'll give that to you, my grandfather, my father's dad, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954 and was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. And my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us. Your husband's been shot. And so when I expressed an interest in following in my grandfather's footsteps, my father was absolutely not. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's what my father wanted me to do. That's not what I felt my purpose in life was. So as I mentioned, my dad was dying of cancer when I graduated from college. So I had probably the first major choice as a man in my life. I could have said, sorry, Dad, know you're dying, but I'm going to go off and blaze my own trail and do what I want to do. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that, that's what I did. My first two jobs were in business because that's what my father wanted me to do. I sort of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my own dreams in getting into law enforcement. And I did that relatively late in life for that profession. I mean, I was the 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by most accounts is pretty old to be getting into that line of work. But it was my purpose. It was something I knew I was supposed to do. And I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I feel very fortunate that I was able to keep that dream alive. That yes, I learned a lot in business. I met some great people, grew up a lot, had some life experience that I was able to take into the law enforcement field. But they weren't jobs that I couldn't wait to get out of bed in the morning and go do. That I felt that way about being in law enforcement. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But in terms of the mindset, I think you have to you have to be open to learning new things. I think one of the most important things we all should do in our lives is be a lifelong learner, to be curious all the time. Why is that happening? How is that happening? And I don't think a lot of people do that. And I think that was what made me successful in law enforcement. I was always curious about why this happened, or what was your involvement in this, or how did this come to be, especially when I was as a negotiator in that. So I think your mindset is incredibly important. You always have to be willing to learn. And there is no, you know this, there is no perfect job. I mean, there's, no matter what your job is, there's always going to be things you don't enjoy about it. But if you can learn from it, if you can figure out ways to make yourself better and take some of the skills that maybe other people have, or that you learn from doing that job, that just makes you a better human being. And regardless of what you do after that, it will make you a better, whatever that ends up being, a marketing person, police officer, first responder, whatever that ends up being.
Just like your point about being that continuous lifelong learner, and like you said about being curious, and you mentioned that especially from the perspective of the negotiating that you used to do. Can you talk a little bit more about that, how curiosity played a role in negotiating for anybody listening that is aspiring perhaps to be a better negotiator?
Sure. I mean, I think we all negotiate at some point in our lives every day, whether it's we're negotiating with our significant other, or our boss, or somebody we're trying to make a business deal with, or whatever it ends up being. We always negotiate. And the overarching theme as a negotiator was trust. So it's the same way in a relationship between a husband and wife, or a parent or a child, or a boss or subordinate. If I don't trust you, then it's incredibly difficult to have a relationship. It's incredibly difficult to get anything done, or to get anything from the other person, if they don't trust you. So trust was incredibly important. Another thing we used was what we call tactical empathy, which was help me understand where you're coming from, help me to understand what's going on here, not agree with you. I mean, if we were negotiating with somebody who just, killed 3 people, I wasn't going to agree that you did that. But at the same time, help me to understand it. What was your reasoning behind it? And that, again, develops trust within a relationship. Another thing that we did is we used what and how questions. What got us to this point? How do you expect me to do that? And we stayed away from why questions, because if I said, hey, Marty, why did you do that? You might be like, oh, wait a minute. Is he accusing me of something? It sounds more accusatory. So we stayed away from why questions. And then I guess just to round it out, we were given a formula when we first started as negotiators, and the formula was 738-55. And it had to do with how we communicate with each other. 7% of how we communicate with each other are the words that we use. 38% of how we communicate with each other is the tone of voice that we use with those words. And then 55% of how we communicate is our body language and our facial expressions. So as negotiators, we weren't with the person we were negotiating. We could be blocks away on a telephone, or behind a locked door. So if I said something to you, if you were a barricaded person or something like that, if I said something, I didn't have the ability to see you go, kind of roll your eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he asked me that, and so we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, sure, but what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. And the last thing I'll say, I think I said that a minute ago, but this really will be the last thing. The last thing I'll say is the importance of listening to understand versus listening to respond. If you and I are having a discussion and I'm like, hurry up, Marty, say what you're going to say because I want to get my 2 cents in here, that's listening to respond versus listening to understand. Okay, Marty, I hear what you're saying. I may agree with you. I may not agree with you, but help me to understand where you're coming from. Now we're connecting as human beings and we're developing that trust. So that kind of in a long-winded answer is how we used to do negotiations from a law enforcement point of view.
With what you said, that you learned to understand what people, like you said, not only what they were saying, but what they weren't saying. Could you dig a little bit deeper into that? What did you mean by that? And how can maybe other people make use of that?
Yeah, I think there were several times where we would spend hours, literally hours, over here talking about an issue, a problem with the person, when the real reason we were there was over here, but they didn't trust us enough. We hadn't built up that rapport with them for them to trust us to talk about that. So again, a lot of times, I guess, think about it this way. We all grew up, I think, going to the park and playing on a teeter-totter or a seesaw at the park. Think about that as a negotiator. When we started negotiating with somebody, their emotional brain was way up in the air and their rational brain was way down on the ground. By asking those how and what questions, by getting them to burn off a lot of that emotional energy, we would try to bring that teeter-totter or that seesaw to equilibrium. And then over more time, again, by asking questions, by using silence, by doing what was called mirroring or parroting, we would get to the point where the person's rational brain was way up in the air and their emotional brain was way down the ground. And when you're using your emotional brain, you're not making good decisions. When you're using your rational brain, you make much better decisions for yourself. So that's why during the first maybe 2, 3, even 4 hours of a negotiation, we never talked about letting the hostage go or coming out or doing anything like that, because the person was operating from their emotional brain. We needed to get to the point where they were operating from their rational brain. When that was happening, now we can talk about solutions to this problem, letting the hostages go, coming out, and things like that. And the other thing we never did to people, and it's kind of a practical thing that we did, is we never lied to people. So people would say to us, hey, I'll come out, but you've got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail. And we would have to say, I'm sorry, when you do come out, you are going to go to jail. And then we would deflect the conversation to something more palatable, more enjoyable. And the reason we did that was because there was a very good chance 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, we would be right back negotiating with that exact same person, because the issue, the problem, didn't go away. It's still there, and it built up again, and now we're negotiating with them. And if they ever felt, hey, Tucker, you didn't treat me right the last time, or you lied to me, then my credibility was gone, my trust was gone, and you would have to bring in another negotiator to talk with that person. So we just didn't lie to people because it wasn't a practical thing to do.
I very much like that you said that we make better, not good decisions with the let's say intelligent brain. So that makes a whole lot of sense, and I very much like that point. But it's all very interesting what you're talking about, that it's not, like you said, not destroying, so to speak, your credibility, or not lying to people, not showing, oh, hey, I told you this one thing, but actually it's the complete opposite. And I feel like a lot of people get stuck in that loop of, oh, I'll just tell them what they want to hear. But then, like you said, a few days, weeks, months, years down the road, you're like, oh, whoops, I did say that to you. So keeping that track record positive, I suppose, is a big takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, just being authentic, and I think that's important in whatever you do, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're in business, or whether you have a relationship with your spouse. It's being authentic. Hey, honey, I don't feel good about this. Can we talk about it? And just being open about it, because if you do that, you have a much better chance of solving a problem, as opposed to letting that problem fester. And it just, you feel bad about it. You're not communicating appropriately with whoever you're having the issue with. So I always encourage people, if you've got a problem with somebody, go talk to them. Not in a, hey, you upset me because you said this. No, hey, I am feeling whatever, scared, nervous, anxious, upset, based on something that you said. Can we talk about this? And it's not an accusatory thing. It's not, I think you're a bad person. It's just, I'm feeling a certain way. Can we try to work this out? Now, you may not be able to. Yeah, I mean, they may feel the way they do and you feel the way you do. But again, talking about it helping me to understand why you said that or where you're coming from or the background that you have with that, at least that gives me an opportunity to say, okay, I understand why Marty said that. I don't agree with it, but at least I understand it. And we're not making the relationship any more difficult. We're maybe kind of capping it at a certain point, or maybe we're making it better because we're willing to talk to each other. It's like, no, Terry, just go away. I said what I said. I'm not going to talk to you about this. No, I want to have that communication with people. I think that's incredibly important to be able to communicate effectively with other people.
And Terry, would you say that it's still acceptable from that perspective of what you were talking about, that, okay, hey, I feel this and this way, can we talk about it? And the other person says, no, I don't want to talk to you. What happens then?
Yeah, you can't make people talk to you. We certainly had that as negotiators. We might be on a PA system or a bullhorn trying to, hey, pick up the phone. We want to talk to you. Pick up, and that would go on for hours, and they would never pick up the phone. They would never talk to us, and so the tactical team would have to go in and remove them and get them out and things like that. So sometimes people just didn't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to try to work this out. Okay, that's fine. The bottom line is that person really was in control, so to speak, of how the situation ended. And about 90% of the time, we were successful at getting the person out. But about 10% of the time, it got to a very serious and deadly situation, sometimes to a point where the person took their own life because they knew that they were caught, they weren't going anywhere, they weren't going to be able to escape, and they knew they had just killed 3 people and they were going to spend the rest of their life in prison. And they're like, I'm not doing that. So I'll end it right here. And why that's always tragic. I think anytime somebody dies, that's always tragic. And I hope you don't feel that I'm callous about this, but I never lost any sleep over that. And the reason I didn't was because I know I worked with great people. I had incredibly great training. And I know in my heart, I did everything I could to get that person out safely. But like I said, at the end of the day, you were going to decide how this went, whether you were going to come out safely or if the tactical team was going to have to go in and get you, or if you decided you were going to end your life. That was your decision on how you did that. I didn't want that. I don't care how bad you were. I don't care what you did. I wanted to get you out safely. But really, at the end of the day, it's your decision. So if you don't want to talk to me, if I come to you with a problem or I'm feeling a certain way and you don't want to deal with it, I can't make you do that. I can just present the opportunity in the hope that you will have a discussion with me.
Certainly, Terry. And I feel like this is a very nice lead into what I also wanted to discuss with you both, what you were just talking about with perhaps the more so emotional pain that you would feel of like you said, knowing that somebody just took their own life, or somebody, like you said, was killed, or those types of very, very tragic situations, or what you told us about at the very beginning with your family history, and also with your own battling with cancer. And I wanted to get your perspective on embracing the suffering, perhaps embracing the pain, and feeling, okay, I know this is hard, I know this is difficult, this hurts like hell, but I can take it. Can you give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was coaching girls' high school basketball, and I had a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially didn't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately, or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I got the call that we all dread in our lives. And as I mentioned, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened, the more scared I was becoming, until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have this incredibly rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet and the palms of the hands. And I think when I was initially diagnosed, I don't think. I know when I was initially diagnosed, I went through all the stages that we would associate with grief. First it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then I got mad. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then our daughter was in high school at the time. So there was sort of a bargaining with God. Hey, let me live long enough for her to get out of high school. And then I certainly got down. I certainly got depressed. But then I got to a point where, kind of like what you said, I was like, this sucks, but I have to embrace the suck. I don't like this. I do not like the cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards, play this hand to the best of my ability. And when I was diagnosed with cancer 11 and a half years ago, I was told it was a death sentence, that I would probably be dead in 2 years. If I got a miracle, I might live 5 years. Well, it's been 11 and a half years now. So you never know. I never take doctors' predictions to heart, because what doctors play the odds. Just like if you go to Las Vegas and play in the casinos, they play the odds. But what the doctors don't know, and what they can't know your heart. They can't know your mind. They can't know your soul. They can't know that next summer your daughter's getting married and by God, you're going to be there, to be at that event, or your kid's graduating from college and you want to be there. Those things keep people going. Those things, I don't care how sick you are, they motivate you. They keep you in the game. They keep you as part of living this life, not just, I quit, I give up, and then that's the end of it. So doctors don't know that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't tell, whatever doctors tell you, you should do. But again, going back to what we were talking about before, be curious, be a learner, understand your disease, understand how you feel when certain things happen in your life. And I think that just makes you a better person. And it certainly makes you a better informed patient.
Did you have a sort of daily routine, perhaps, or some kind of affirmations or any of those types of things that you did every day to keep yourself up?
I certainly pray every day. I spend about an hour every day in prayer. As I mentioned, when I was first diagnosed, there really wasn't anything they could offer me other than surgery. If the cancer was somewhere, we can cut it out, we'll cut it out. Otherwise, we don't have anything to offer you. And they put me on a drug called interferon, which was a weekly injection. And the side effects of interferon for me were that it gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after those injections. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu, and I'm talking about a bad case of the flu where you're throwing up and you ache and you have a headache and you have the chills and all that kind of stuff every week for 5 years. And I got to a point where I felt, certainly I was alive, but I didn't feel I was living. There was a difference between living and not dying. And I kind of felt I was in that not dying stage. And I never thought about taking my own life, but I did pray to have God end my life, to just take me out of this, be done with this, because I didn't feel I was contributing. I didn't feel I was part of anything. It was literally, I was living day to day. If you would have said, hey, Terry, what are your goals? A year from now, if I have no goals. My goals are, I'm going to try to live today. That's all I was doing. And sometimes I used to talk about winning the day. Sometimes winning the day was literally, I got to get out of bed and I've got to walk to the couch. I've got to walk to the sofa where I'm going to spend my day. And then when that's over, I'm going to go back to bed. That was winning the day. Sometimes winning the day was, I can throw a load of laundry in the wash machine and help my wife out in that regard. So it wasn't big stuff. It wasn't, I got these great goals. No, my goal was, I just got to live today and hopefully I'll figure out how to live tomorrow, because that was not something I even worried about. So yeah, I think you really, again, going back to what we were talking about before, mindset is incredibly important. And people always ask me, how do you survive it? How did you do that? How did you have your foot amputated in 2018, your leg amputated during the COVID pandemic? And I think there's an easy way to get to that point in anybody's life, but it's a hard thing to do. And that is basically, in order to callous your mind, just like we get calluses on our hands from doing hard work, you need to do hard things. You need to do things you don't want to do. Well, you know what? I don't want to get up this morning and go to the gym. Get up and go to the gym. I don't want to study for this test, study for that test. I don't want to clean the house, clean the house. Do those small things every day. And if you do those every day, if you do difficult things every day, you'll be so much more resilient to handle the big things when they happen. And they happen to all of us. We lose somebody who's close to us. We get let go from our job. We find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness.
I very much love that message, and that's something that I very much like listening to from also David Goggins. If you're familiar, I love his message on calluses in your brain, what you're talking about, that okay, you may not want to do that, but by doing that is really the only way that you can get stronger and then develop that mental resilience perhaps, or self-confidence, or whatever it is that you're seeking from life. It's all about making those difficult decisions, doing the things like you said that you don't really want to do, the stepping out of your comfort zone mantra that we all hear all the time from everybody, but it really does genuinely make a difference. And I very much like that you came back to the mindset part of it. Like you said, that it's not just the physical body that matters, but rather how you feel, or maybe even not how you feel, because I guess you didn't feel really great, but what you want for yourself, or what you don't want for yourself perhaps as well. And for anybody listening that is in that very, very low rock bottom potentially, or somebody that is just not feeling great about themselves, do you have any tips, recommendations, any habits perhaps that you can recommend for people to develop?
Yeah, I don't want anybody listening to us to think that, excuse me, that I have the market cornered on, that I never get down. I'm absolutely a human being. I have bad days. I am still being treated for tumors that I have in my lungs. I'm treated every 3 weeks. I get down. I feel sorry for myself. I cry. I do all that kind of stuff. And I'll give you a story that I think will help people. And I think about the story when I get into those places. And I'll also give you a tip that I think can get you out of it. The story is involving a professor at Johns Hopkins University back in the 1950s. And he did a very simple experiment. He took rats. And as soon as I say that, everybody's like, oh, well, this is not going to be a good story. No, trust me. Hang with me. It's going to be a good story. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water before it would sink and drown. And the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I'm just not, my business isn't going to fail. I'm going to fail this class or whatever it is. No, you're going to die. Your life is going to be over. The second time around, 60 hours, which said to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that we have to believe, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even next year. But if we keep doing the things we know we're supposed to do, the things that are in our heart, that are in our soul, that eventually we'll get to where we want to be. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. Now, don't get me wrong. I think everybody has a breaking point, but I think that breaking point is so much further down the road. We quit, we give up, we throw in the towel long before our physical bodies are willing to do that, because we can't callous our minds, because our minds tell us, oh, this hurts. Okay, I'm done. I don't want to go on. But no, if you can callous your mind, if you can control your mind is going to control your body. And so if you can control your mind, you can continue to move forward. And let me give you this. This is what I do. Do I feel down from time to time? Absolutely. And when I do that, I find that I'm looking inward. Oh, woe is me. This is terrible. I feel bad. I'm sick. I hurt, all that kind of stuff. It's all about me. I find a real easy way to get out of that is to take that and flip it outside. Like, okay, who can I go help? Who can I pick up the phone and call that I know is having a bad day or whatever? Now, all of a sudden, I'm not focused on me and my pain and my discomfort. Now I'm focused on making a difference in somebody else's life, a positive difference in somebody else's life. All of a sudden now, it's not about me, it's about helping somebody else. And I find, at least for me, when I do that, I get out of that sort of funk where I'm like, oh, it's all about, no, it's not about you. Go help somebody else, make a difference in somebody else's life, and see how your outlook, your emotions change from woe is me to, hey, I'm going to make a difference in somebody else's life.
I really love that message, Terry, and I feel like that makes a lot of sense considering a lot of these cases that, for example, there is a couple and then one of them passes away and the other passes away right after. And that's always been a fascinating phenomenon, but it shows exactly what you're talking about, that they weren't perhaps living to live their best life, but they were living for the other person. And as soon as they, quote unquote, lost that motivation, then they didn't see that will to go on by themselves. So like what you're talking about, that focusing on other people, focusing on helping others, how do you do that mostly? I mean, you do have your bigger purpose perhaps right now. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned, I started playing basketball when I was 9 years old, and I played all the way up until I graduated from college. And I think one of the things that team sports, and for me, it was sports. I think it can be whatever team you're on, whether it's your colleagues or your family or your church or whatever it ends up being, whatever team you're on, and we're all on a team. What I learned from team sports is the importance of being part of something that's bigger than yourself. You realize on a team that if you don't do your job, not only do you let yourself down, but you let your teammates down, your coaches down, your fans down, your parents down, etc. And if you think about it, the biggest team game that we all play is this game of life. And I'm on a clinical trial drug now that I've been on for 2.5 years. And I'm treated every 3 weeks for an entire week at the hospital. And more than likely, this drug is not going to save my life. But the way I look at it is, maybe it's going to save the life of somebody 5 years from now, 10 years from now, based on the data that the doctors are gleaning from my blood tests and my scans. And if that's the case, to me, that's being part of something that's bigger than myself. Even if I'm not here, even if I've already died, somebody else will benefit from what I've done. And again, I think that's an important way to look at life, that it's not just about you. I think if COVID taught us anything, it's how much we need each other. During COVID, you saw alcoholism rates go up, drug abuse rates go up, domestic violence rates go up. We need each other to be successful. We need each other to be good. We don't live our lives in a vacuum. We need other human beings. And so when you look at how has your life made a positive difference in another human being, you never know the answer to that question. About 8 weeks ago, I got an email from a gentleman who I had no idea who he was. And he said, I just listened to your podcast and it really touched my heart. And I said, that's great. I said, what podcast did you listen to? And he sent me the name of the podcast. And I was like, I don't remember this podcast. So I went back and I looked. It was a podcast I had done 2.5 years ago. And he had found the episode and listened to it. So you never know, something you do today it's kind of like planting a crop or a flower. You plant it in the hope that it germinates, that it eventually gets to a point where somebody else can benefit from it, whether they eat the food that it generates, or they see the beauty, or they sit underneath the tree that you planted, whatever that ends up being. And yet you never get the benefit from it, or you may get a small benefit from it. But what you do today very well may have a positive impact on somebody's life 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, down the road. So don't sell yourself short that, it's not going to matter. I promise you, if it's something positive, it's something good, it absolutely will matter.
And Terry, talk to me a little bit about those, let's say, daily things that people can do, because I'm assuming that most of the people that are listening to this might not be doing what you are doing, and then hopefully they're not in that position to be doing that. But can you think of any daily little things, maybe small deeds that people can do? Like you said, maybe calling a friend, calling a family member, but can you give some other tips or situations, or perhaps some again little habits that people can develop to make that greater difference?
Yeah, I think you have to find out what makes you feel good. Whether it's eating certain foods, whether it's meditating, if you do that, whether it's exercising, whether it's praying, whatever, whether it's calling somebody. Hey, I'm gonna make a decision this week. I'm gonna call two people that I know are having a tough time, and stick to that. Do that. Make the time, make the effort. One, it'll make you feel good, and two, it will also make other people feel good. And I know, I started my speaking business just as COVID hit. And I was like so many other businesses, oh my gosh, how do I retool? How do I reconfigure what I'm doing and deliver my service, deliver my product in a different manner? And somebody reached out to me and said, would you like to be a guest on my podcast? And I said, sure. What's a podcast? I had no idea what a podcast was. And they're like, well, we kind of have a conversation. We put it on social media. And I was like, okay. Again, do the uncomfortable, do the things that you don't want to do. So I said, sure, I'll do it. And I remember my first podcast, I had Post-it notes all around the camera. And the person would ask me a question and I would lean in and I would kind of read the Post-it notes. I was horrible. I was terrible. I did not have any kind of good stories. And I remember I was talking to my publisher, the publisher of my book, and I said, Scott, I listen to every, excuse me, every podcast I've ever been on. And he said, well, why do you do that? I said, well, I want to be a good guest. So the host feels that it was a good use of his or her time. And he's like, no, Terry, that's not important. He said, it's not about being good. It's just about not sucking. And I said, well, thanks for the title of my next book, Just Don't Suck. But I said, no, it's not about that. It's about wanting to be good. It's about wanting to be better today than I was yesterday. And then tomorrow, I want to be better than I was that day. And you don't have to do big things, but it's those small individual things. Find a reason, find a person that you can make a positive difference in their life. That, to me, I think is sort of the gold standard of, I don't care how bad you're feeling. I don't care how scared you are. I don't care how nervous you are. And I'll give you one more story. Every Monday when I go to treatment, I have to have blood work done. So I'm at the hospital at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I kind of open the blood bank, the blood or the lab with the receptionist. And I always talk to the reception. How was your weekend? What did you do? Did you do anything exciting? And one day she said to me, you're always so kind to me. You always ask me about my weekend, about what. And I said, well, one, I'm just kind of a curious person. And I said, two, I'm just kind of interested. What'd you do this weekend? Maybe there's something I would like to do. I said, why do you find that to be out of the ordinary? And she said, well, as the receptionist, she said, I have so many people that come in here and treat me badly, treat me poorly. They yell at me, or they're short with me, or they're curt, or they're disrespectful. And I asked her, I said, do you know why they do that? And she's a young girl, and she's like, no, not really. I said, think about it from their perspective. They're probably scared. They're probably nervous. They're probably worried what this blood test that they're going to have is going to tell their doctor, and where they are in their disease, or their disease is getting worse, or there's nothing more we can do for you. I said, think about what an opportunity that gives you to put goodness, to put kindness back into their lives. No matter how bad they treat you, you treat them with just as much kindness, just as much goodness. That's just, I think, kind of encapsulates what we're talking about. No matter how bad things are in your life, no matter how bad people treat you, turn around and be just as good and kind to them. See what happens in your life.
There is so much to unpack with what you just said, and I very much love those stories that you just shared, because I feel like there are so many life lessons there that we hear over and over again, but I feel like most of them just kind of go in one side and then go out the other. But it really is what you're talking about, that looking at the world not just from your own perspective, even what we were talking about before, oh, this is me, oh no, look at me. But okay, maybe somebody was mean, or like you said, rude, disrespectful. Sure, that doesn't feel great, but why were they doing that? And not to blame so much everybody else for everything that happens to you, and oh, I was perfect and I didn't do anything and everybody's just mean and angry at me. Perhaps, Like you said, looking outside at them and looking at the world from their perspective too, that hey, like you said, maybe they were just having a bad day, maybe they're scared, maybe they don't really want to be here, maybe they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in their life. So definitely having a lot of that, what you said at the very beginning, maybe not so much tactical in this case, but having empathy at the end of the day, genuine empathy, hopefully for other people and what they're going through as well. And I very much like that point. And then I do wonder if, because again, as what you were saying before, it's not a nice experience to have people, like you said, yell at you and be mean and rude. So what could you recommend to people in, I suppose this very often happens in the service business, but for anybody else that is in that position, do you have any tips or tricks to control your emotions, perhaps to okay, this is going on, this is happening, I understand, or maybe I'm trying to understand why this is happening, and to not just, like you said, snap back at the other person, but to take that deep breath and okay, this is fine. How do you deal with that yourself, maybe?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you kind of hit on it. Take a deep breath. You don't there when you attack me, there's an initial wanting to immediately snap back at, I'm gonna fire back at you. A mature person, a wise person realizes that's not usually the best option. There's a reason. You're frustrated. You got two kids are screaming in your ear, and you don't like the way your salad's made. Okay, it's not my fault, but I want to work with you. I want to. It's like, ma'am, I'm sorry that happened. I think it's important to be humble, to understand that to have that character, to be a person of good character, and part of that is to be humble is to realize I'm sorry, ma'am. I will make this right for you. How do you want your salad? And a lot of times people once, without calling them out on it, but treating them with kindness, and I will make this right. I will help you to get through this. Do you need to go to the bathroom? You know what? I'll watch your kids while you do that. Whatever it ends up being, you'll do something that helps them. They realize, oh, man, I was kind of a jerk to you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. But if you immediately fire back on people, and I think that's people's initial reaction, is to somebody says something negative or something bad to you, you immediately want to send something back at them. That's not being a good steward. That's not being a good steward of other people. Now, sometimes it's appropriate. Don't get me wrong. I'm not telling you to never do it. Sometimes it's absolutely appropriate. But again, just take a step back for a second. Take 1 second. Take a deep breath. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your salad's not right. How can I help? How can I make this better for you? Yeah, you just attacked me. Again, I think it kind of goes back to all the social media. People get on their phones and they're like, oh, I don't like the way Marty's hair looks today, or I don't like what Marty's wearing today. Well, that only hurts you, Marty, if you let it inside of you. I mean, if you act like Superman, it's like bang, it just hit me and it bounced off. It doesn't hurt me at all. Why do you let people rent space in your brain when they have never been in your shoes? They've never walked a mile in your shoes, a minute in your shoes. Why do you let them? Why do you care? Why would Marty care that you don't like my hair, you don't like my outfits, you don't like whatever I'm doing? I don't get that. I don't understand why people allow other people to dictate how they feel. Only you should be able to dictate how you feel. And that shouldn't be something that's done by what other people say or do. So I would say be humble, be kind, take a deep breath. And when you do that, I think a lot of times people will say, man, I shouldn't have gotten upset with you. I know you're just trying to make this right. But if you immediately fire back at people, now you've escalated the situation. And a lot of times people don't know how to get out of that. You're mad at me, I'm mad at you. How do we get out of this? Somebody's got to be the bigger person and say, okay, how can I make this better for you?
I love that message, Terry, and I love to preach that as well, that I feel like we all get so wound up on what other people say and what other people think, and oh, I won't apply for that job because oh, what will they think of me? Or I won't talk to this person because oh, what will they think of me? Whatever they will think of you is none of your concern. I mean, they can hate you, they can love you. Does that matter? Probably not. Probably not really. And chances are they will forget about you in 50 seconds, and so will you. So move on with your life and don't make it more sad than it needs to be.
Right. And I actually developed or devoted a whole chapter in my book to most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. And I think that goes exactly to what you were saying. You know, I want to start this business. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people think about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And whenever I speak to groups, especially younger people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be those things that you did. They're going to be those things that you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
That's a really nice message. I like that. I like that. That it's like you said, it's the things that you didn't do that you regret because, oh, I tried, I did my best, like you said at the very beginning. Well, that's okay if it maybe just wasn't meant to be. But for anybody listening, can you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Sure, the book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it's a book that was really born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner, I'm really excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. She got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media who was in college. And he said, what do you think are the most important things I should learn to not just be successful in my life or in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him, Marty, we've all heard the, get up early, work hard, help out. We've heard all the sort of cliches, and I didn't want to give him that. So I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time and I was taking notes, and I started to have these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So literally during the period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
And could you share one of these principles with us?
Yeah, I mean, some of them we've already talked about. I mean, the one that resonates with me, and it's always fun. I mean, the principles not in any order. Number one isn't any more important than number seven, but it's always fun when somebody reaches out who's read the book, because there's always one of the 10 that really resonates with the reader. It's like really hits you in the heart. And the one that does for me is the one I just gave you. Most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their mind. There's a principle in there about remaining curious, remaining a lifelong learner. There's a principle in there about being part of something that's bigger than yourself. There's a principle in there about you are the person you're looking to become. So even if you're not that person, and I kind of borrowed that from what I talked about in my own life. My first two jobs were in business. I really didn't feel that was the person I was supposed to be. I felt I wanted to be in law enforcement. So even though I wasn't in law enforcement, I still was that person that I wanted to be, or that I was supposed to be in life. And maybe the last one is probably the most important one. And that's that the word love, or love, is the most important word in any language, regardless whether it's English or French or Spanish or whatever it ends up being. That love of yourself, love of your fellow man, love of your family is really the most important thing in your life. And we all think that we need to be successful in life. We've got to have all this stuff. And Marty, the way I've come to understand this is this: we seem to think that we're born empty, and that as we go through life, when we get out of school, so to speak, and we get into life, whatever life looks like for us, that when we do that, that our job is to fill ourselves up. Now I've got to get a good education. I've got to get a good job. I've got to drive a nice car, live in a nice house, have a nice family. And by getting all this stuff, by filling ourselves up, somehow we're going to be happy and fulfilled. And what I've come to understand is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're born full. We're born with everything we need to be successful in life already inside us. We just need to find that, pull it out, and use it to our benefit. So instead of thinking it's what I get, it should be it's what I give. Our job should not be to fill ourselves up. It should be to empty ourselves out for the betterment, certainly of ourselves, but of our family, of our communities, of our countries, and things like that. And I think people that do that are much happier and much more fulfilled than people who think I've got to have it all, because you can never have enough. There will always be one more thing that you're going after. And if I get that, then that'll make me happy. Well, I got that and I'm still not happy. Well, what if I got this? So it's not about what you get, it's about what you can give.
Really beautiful piece of wisdom. And I think maybe that's going to be a quote for this episode. I very, very much love that like you said, we're always trying to look for the outside and the external things that we can get, but in reality, all you need is inside. Very poetic. Very nice. Very nice. And for anybody that wants to listen to more of your wisdom and more of your beautiful messages, of course, with the book, can you tell me where people can find that? Maybe any social media that you're on as well?
Sure. So Sustainable Excellence is available anywhere you can get a book online: Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, Apple iBooks. Pretty much if you search for Sustainable Excellence, you can find it wherever you get your books. I do have a blog called Motivational Check. Every day I put up a thought for the day. And with that thought usually comes, excuse me, a quote or a question about how you could apply that in your life. I put up the Monday morning motivational message, have recommendations for books to read, videos to watch. I'm on pretty much all the social medias: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those. So, and you can get access to all those if you go to motivationalcheck.com.
Wonderful, wonderful, perfect. And Terry, tell me, do you have any final words, final pieces of wisdom?
I'll tell you one more story, if you don't mind. Um, I had a nurse recently ask me what it was like to have my foot amputated in 2018 and my leg amputated in 2020. And I told her it hasn't been easy. As I mentioned, I'm 6'8" tall. So learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You fall from this height, you get hurt. So I told her it certainly has been difficult. But what I also told her was cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Marty. That's who everybody who's listening to us is. And we spend a great deal of time working on our bodies. We go to the gym, we eat right, we need to get enough rest, we want to reduce stress. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm absolutely in favor of all that. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day, spend a little time working on who you really are: your heart, your mind, and your soul. We all know we're going to die, that this body is going to decay and go away. But who we are, our heart, our mind, and our soul, those things are eternal. Those things will live forever. But I think we need more time to work on those things to make us better.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Terry. I think that's a really, really beautiful way to finish up our conversation. And I do thank you very much for everything that you've shared here, for your time, of course, for opening yourself up to everybody that listened to us today. So thank you very much for that, Terry.
Well, Marty, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.